In the heart of the galaxy, on the grand planet of Illyria, there lived a princess named Zarin. She was known throughout the stars not only for her beauty, but also for her intelligence and wisdom. People would travel from far and wide to catch a glimpse of her, hoping to earn her favor. The alien races of the galaxy sent her countless proposals, seeking her hand in marriage, but time and time again, she turned them down. To Zarin, the suitors were nothing more than pawns in a game of political alliances. She was a princess, yes, but she was also a woman with her own dreams, desires, and a deep yearning for something more than the life laid out before her. Illyria was a planet of ancient traditions, and one of its most sacred traditions was the royal marriage. As the heir to the throne, Zarin was expected to marry a powerful ruler or a respected warrior, someone who could secure her kingdom's place in the galaxy. Her family, her advisors, and the court had all been clear about it. Marriage was not about love. It was about power, stability, and alliances. But Zarin could never bring herself to believe in that idea. In the grand palace of Illyria, the halls were always filled with the whispers of suitors. Each one would arrive in their finest armor, bringing gifts of unimaginable wealth, hoping to win the princess's favor. But none of them could stir anything in her heart. Zarin could see through their intentions. Their offers of marriage were less about love and more about gaining influence. They weren't interested in who she was as a person. They only cared about what she could give them. Zarin often found herself staring out of her chamber window, looking at the stars. She would imagine a life far from the palace, away from the endless duties, away from the expectations of her royal lineage. She wanted to know what it was like to be free, to choose her own path, and to live without the weight of tradition holding her down. But there was a problem. As a princess, Zarin's life was not her own. Every decision she made, every action she took, was scrutinized by her family, her people, and her court. She could not afford to follow her heart. It wasn't that she disliked all of the suitors. Some were handsome, charming even, but Zarin could not ignore the cold, calculated nature of their proposals. They would speak of their kingdoms, of their strength, of their wealth, but never once did they ask about her. Never once did they try to understand who she truly was. They didn't see her as a person. They saw her as a means to an end. Zarin's parents, King Rylar and Queen Xena, were growing concerned. They had arranged numerous meetings with suitors, each one more impressive than the last, but each one met with the same result: a polite refusal. "Zarin, darling," her mother would say, "you must choose soon. The future of Illyria depends on it. You must make an alliance with a powerful house. Your people expect it." The words always sounded so empty to Zarin. She could never quite bring herself to believe that love could be replaced by power and influence. But as much as she wished for something different, the pressure mounted. The weight of the crown seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. One evening, as the sun set behind the grand palace, Zarin walked through the royal gardens. The air was crisp, and the flowers bloomed in brilliant shades of violet and gold. She ran her fingers across the petals of a blooming vine and closed her eyes. The peacefulness of the moment was a brief escape from the pressures she faced. But even here, in the solitude of the gardens, the voices of her court followed her. "You must choose, princess," they would say. "The galaxy is waiting for your decision." Zarin's thoughts wandered as she walked deeper into the garden. She dreamed of a life where she could marry for love, not politics. She imagined meeting someone who saw her for who she was, not for her title. But such dreams seemed foolish. Love was a luxury she could not afford. Her duty to her people, her family, and her kingdom came first. The idea of choosing a life partner based on affection seemed as distant as the stars themselves. As Zarin paused by a fountain, she couldn't help but feel a sense of longing. Her heart yearned for something more, something beyond the walls of the palace. Yet she could not bring herself to act on that longing. She was the princess of Illyria, bound by tradition and expectation. But deep down, Zarin knew that her heart was not in the life her family had planned for her. She turned to leave the gardens, her mind heavy with uncertainty. The court would be waiting for her decision. The suitors would be waiting, hoping that she would finally choose one of them. But Zarin had made her decision long ago. She would not choose just anyone. She would wait for something or someone who would stir her heart in a way no suitor had ever done. And little did she know that someone was closer than she could ever imagine. A human diplomat who was about to walk into her life would challenge everything Zarin thought she knew about love, duty, and the future of Illyria. But for now, she could only wait and wonder. The royal palace of Illyria was a place where the finest minds gathered, where treaties were signed, and where delicate alliances were formed. It was also a place of pressure and expectation, especially for Princess Zarin. Her life was carefully planned out for her, and she could not stray from the path laid by her family. Yet, every day, she felt more suffocated by the weight of tradition and duty. This particular day, however, was different. The grand hall of the palace was buzzing with excitement as a human diplomat arrived. His name was Marcus, and he was sent to Illyria to help negotiate a peace treaty between two powerful alien factions. The human race, once considered primitive by many, had made great strides in technology and diplomacy. Though still young in comparison to the ancient alien civilizations, humanity had earned a reputation for being shrewd and capable in negotiations. Marcus was different from the usual guests at the palace. He was not dressed in the formal robes or armored suits worn by most of the alien dignitaries. Instead, he wore a simple, tailored suit that reflected his practical nature. His brown eyes sparkled with intelligence, and his confident yet humble demeanor stood in stark contrast to the stiff, formal airs of the Illyrian court. As he entered the grand hall, his eyes scanned the room. He had heard many stories about the Illyrian royalty, and he was eager to meet them. But it wasn't the royalty that immediately caught his attention. It was the princess. Zarin stood by the window, gazing out at the stars. Her dark, flowing hair framed her face perfectly, and her sharp blue eyes seemed to hold the weight of the galaxy. She was elegant, poised, and untouchable in the eyes of many. But to Marcus, there was something different about her. She had an air of sadness, a sense of being trapped. It was a feeling he knew all too well. He couldn't help but stare at her, noticing the way she carried herself with both strength and grace. She wasn't like the other women he had encountered. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was the depth in her eyes that made him curious. It was almost as if she was searching for something that no one could give her. Marcus approached a group of diplomats, and they exchanged pleasantries. He politely ignored the glances thrown his way by the other high-ranking officials. They were all curious about him, the first human to step foot in their court. But Marcus didn't mind. He was here on business, not to be the center of attention. After a brief conversation, Marcus was escorted into a private meeting room. It was then that he saw her again. Princess Zarin stood near a grand table, surrounded by advisors. Her presence filled the room, and Marcus couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. She was the heart of this world, the future queen. Yet he could sense that she was not at peace. Zarin's gaze met Marcus's, and for a brief moment they locked eyes. A spark of recognition passed between them, though neither could explain it. Zarin quickly looked away, her royal composure returning. She couldn't afford to appear distracted, especially in front of so many influential beings. But Marcus had already been struck by something. There was something about her that intrigued him. It wasn't just her beauty or her royal status. It was the loneliness he saw in her eyes. He wondered what it must be like to live under such intense pressure, to be constantly surrounded by people who wanted something from you. Marcus could relate to that. In his own world, he often felt like a pawn in a game of politics, despite being far from royalty. The meeting began, and Marcus was introduced to the various officials present. Zarin remained silent for most of the discussion, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. As the negotiations went on, Marcus found himself stealing glances at her. She was focused on the matter at hand, but every now and then, her gaze would wander, just for a moment. And when their eyes met again, there was something unspoken between them. After the meeting, Marcus was given a tour of the palace. As he walked through the vast corridors, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the history around him. The palace was filled with the echoes of generations of rulers, each one bound by duty, each one expected to carry the burden of their ancestors. But what struck him the most was the absence of Zaren's laughter. There was no joy in the air, no sense of lightness. The palace was beautiful, but it felt cold, distant. It was a world built on power and tradition, and Zaren was at the center of it all. Yet, Marcus could see the cracks in the facade, the lawn, illness that she carried with her. That evening, during a grand banquet in Marcus's honor, Zaren's eyes found him once again. This time, she didn't look away. There was something in the way she studied him, something that made Marcus feel like she was seeing him for the first time, not just as a diplomat, but as a person. She seemed to be asking herself something. Did she truly want to remain in this world of politics and duty, or was there more to life than what had been planned for her? Marcus couldn't help but feel a pull toward her. It wasn't just about the treaty or the negotiations anymore. There was something about Zaren, something real and raw, that he wanted to understand. She wasn't like the others, and he wasn't like the suitors who had come before him. He didn't want to gain power or prestige through her. He just wanted to know her, to see beyond the walls of her royal life. As the night drew to a close, Zaren found herself alone in a quiet garden, her thoughts racing. The human diplomat had unsettled her. There was something about him that made her question everything she had ever known. And for the first time in a long while, Zaren wondered if there might be something more to life than the path she had been forced to walk. The days after Marcus's arrival at the Illyrian palace were full of diplomatic meetings, political discussions, and endless preparations for the peace treaty. Yet, despite the busy schedule, Zaren found herself thinking more and more about the human diplomat. She had never been so curious about someone before, especially not one of the many visitors who had passed through the palace doors. There was something different about Marcus, something that set him apart from the powerful alien rulers and wealthy nobles who had tried to win her favor. Zaren had been raised to understand the importance of duty, of tradition. As the future queen of Illyria, she had been taught that her choices were not her own. Her marriage, her alliances, her future were all planned out, all designed to secure her people's place in the galaxy. But in Marcus, she saw something she had never seen in any of the suitors who had come before him: freedom. Freedom to make his own choices, to speak his mind, to live without the weight of royal expectations. She couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to live a life like his. To be free from the constant pressure to marry for power, to choose a partner because of love, not political advantage. Zaren was beginning to question everything she had ever known, and Marcus was at the center of those thoughts. Her curiosity about him grew with each passing day. She found herself seeking out moments when they could talk, moments when they could be alone without the watchful eyes of her court. At first, their conversations were casual, centered around the treaty negotiations, the differences between their cultures, and the nature of intergalactic diplomacy. But over time, Zaren found herself talking to Marcus about more personal matters, things she had never shared with anyone else. One evening, after a particularly long day of meetings, Zaren took a walk in the palace gardens. The air was cool, and the stars above glimmered like tiny diamonds. She wandered along a stone path, lost in thought, when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Marcus approaching. His face was tired, but his eyes held the same warmth and curiosity she had come to associate with him. "Princess," he said, his voice calm and friendly. "I thought I might find you here." Zaren smiled faintly. "It's one of the few places in the palace where I can think clearly." "I understand," Marcus said, taking a few steps closer. "It must be difficult to live under such constant pressure." Zaren nodded, her gaze turning back to the stars. "It is," she said softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be able to make my own choices, to live the life I want, instead of the one that has been chosen for me." Marcus stood quietly beside her for a moment, his presence comforting yet distant. He didn't speak right away, allowing her words to hang in the air between them. Finally, he said, "You don't have to answer to anyone but yourself. You have the power to choose." Zarin looked at him then, really looked at him. There was something in his eyes, a sincerity, a belief that she could make her own decisions. It was something she hadn't heard in years, not from her parents, not from her advisors, not even from the suitors who had come to win her hand. Everyone had always told her what she should do, what was expected of her. But Marcus wasn't like that. He was different, and that difference intrigued her. "But how?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How can I choose when everything is already decided for me?" Marcus took a step closer, his voice soft but firm. "Sometimes you just have to take a step forward, even when you're not sure where it will lead. It's not easy, but it's worth it." Zarin felt a stirring in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. It was a mix of hope and fear, of possibility and uncertainty. For the first time in ages, she felt like she could breathe freely. Marcus wasn't offering her any grand solutions or promises, but his words resonated with her. He was offering her something far more valuable, the belief that she could make her own choices. Over the following days, Zarin found herself looking for every opportunity to speak with Marcus. They would meet in the gardens, in quiet corners of the palace, or even during the brief moments between meetings. Each conversation seemed to bring them closer, though neither of them spoke of it aloud. They were both aware of the delicate nature of their connection, aware of the boundaries they were treading. But there was no denying the growing bond between them. Zarin found herself thinking about Marcus even when he wasn't around. She replayed their conversations in her mind, wondering about his life back on Earth, wondering what it would be like to be with someone who saw her for who she truly was, not just as a princess. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of something real. Meanwhile, Marcus, too, was becoming more drawn to Zarin. She was unlike any woman he had ever met. Her intelligence, her strength, her beauty, they were all striking, but it was the depth of her spirit that truly captivated him. He saw the sadness in her eyes, the way she carried the weight of her kingdom on her shoulders, and he couldn't help but want to protect her, to show her that she didn't have to carry that burden alone. But he knew that he was treading on dangerous ground. He was just a diplomat, a visitor in her world. He had no place in her life, no right to ask for anything more than friendship. Yet, the connection they shared was undeniable. Marcus could feel the pull between them, the way their conversations flowed easily, the way they could speak without fear of judgment. It was something he hadn't experienced before, and it left him wanting more. Zarin, for her part, was beginning to realize that Marcus might be the one person who truly understood her. And as the days passed, she couldn't help but wonder if this connection, this spark between them, was something more than a fleeting moment. But she couldn't allow herself to believe that. She was a princess, and the choices she made would affect the entire galaxy. Still, a small part of her couldn't help but dream of a life where love was her choice, not her duty. A life where she could be with someone who saw her for who she was, not for the crown she wore. The days passed, and the atmosphere in the palace grew heavier. Zarin's parents, King Rylar and Queen Xena, were beginning to grow frustrated with their daughter's refusal to choose a suitor. The Illyrian court was filled with whispers, and the pressure on Zarin to make a decision was mounting. The suitors who had arrived in hopes of winning her heart had begun to grow impatient, and their patience was running out. Zarin had never felt so trapped in her life. The more time she spent with Marcus, the more she realized how different he was from the others. He didn't treat her like a royal figure or a political asset. He treated her like a person. He saw her for who she truly was, not for the crown she wore or the kingdom she represented. But the reality of her position kept her from acting on her feelings. She couldn't simply ignore the demands of her people, her family, and the court. The royal court, filled with influential leaders and dignitaries from across the galaxy, was a place where every action was scrutinized. The suitors who had come to win Zerin's hand were not just seeking love, they were seeking power. They wanted to marry the princess to strengthen their influence and to solidify their place in the galaxy. It was a game of politics, and Zerin had no desire to play. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Zerin found herself in a private meeting with her parents. The room was filled with tension as King Rylar and Queen Sina sat at opposite ends of the long table, their expressions stern. Zerin stood at the center, feeling like she was on trial. "Zerin, this has gone on long enough," King Rylar said, his voice deep and commanding. "You've refused every suitor, and the pressure on the kingdom is growing. The future of Illyria depends on you making a choice." Zerin's heart sank. She had heard these words before. They were the same words that echoed through her mind every time she faced a meeting like this. "Father, I understand," she replied quietly, "but I cannot marry for political reasons. I cannot choose a suitor simply because it is expected of me." Queen Sina, ever the diplomat, leaned forward. "Zerin, you must understand that your role is not just about personal happiness. You are the future queen of Illyria. Your marriage will secure alliances, protect our people, and ensure the future of our kingdom. You cannot ignore the responsibilities that come with your position." Zerin's mind raced. She had always known the weight of her responsibilities, but she could no longer ignore the growing sense of dissatisfaction that tugged at her heart. "But what about my happiness?" she asked softly. "What about my choice?" Her mother's expression softened, but only for a moment. "Zerin, your happiness will come when the kingdom is secure. When you fulfill your duty." Zerin wanted to argue, to tell her parents that happiness couldn't be postponed indefinitely. But she knew that doing so would only bring more tension to the already fragile atmosphere in the palace. She felt trapped, suffocated by the expectations of everyone around her. Later that evening, as Zerin walked through the palace halls, she could hear the distant sounds of laughter and conversation coming from the grand banquet hall. The suitors had gathered once again, each one waiting for their chance to speak with the princess. Zerin didn't want to face them. She didn't want to listen to their promises of power, wealth, and influence. She didn't want to be treated like a prize to be won. Instead, Zerin found herself slipping out into the garden, the familiar scent of flowers filling the air. The quiet of the night was a welcome relief. She sat on a stone bench, trying to clear her mind. But it was difficult. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Marcus, to the way he had made her feel seen, heard, and understood. For the first time in her life, she felt like someone valued her for more than just her title. As she sat there, lost in thought, she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw Marcus walking toward her, his expression warm but filled with concern. He had been keeping his distance lately, respecting the royal boundaries. But tonight, something had brought him to her. "Princess," he said gently, his voice low, "I thought I might find you here." Zerin managed a small smile. "I needed some air." Marcus sat beside her, his presence calm and reassuring. "You seem troubled," he observed. "What's on your mind?" Zerin hesitated for a moment, unsure whether she should speak her thoughts aloud. But there was something about Marcus that made her feel like she could trust him. He wasn't like the others. He didn't expect anything from her, didn't want anything in return. He simply wanted to listen. "I'm torn, Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My family expects me to choose a suitor. They want me to marry someone who will strengthen Illyria's position in the galaxy. But I can't do that. I can't marry someone just because it's expected of me." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I understand. You want to make your own choice, to be with someone who sees you for who you are, not for what you can offer." Zerin's heart skipped a beat. That was exactly what she wanted. She wanted someone who would see her beyond the crown, someone who would love her for herself, not for her title. But she knew that such a choice was impossible. "You deserve to be happy, Zerin," Marcus said softly. "But I understand that your duty to your people is important too." Zerin sighed. her shoulders slumping with the weight of her decision. "I don't know what to do anymore. Every day, I feel like I'm being pulled in two different directions." Marcus looked at her, his gaze gentle. "Sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that come from the heart." Zarin turned to him, her eyes searching his face for any hint of doubt. But all she saw was sincerity, a genuine desire to help her find her own path. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to make her own choice. A choice that would make her happy, even if it went against everything she had been taught. The pressure on Princess Zarin had never been greater. Her parents, King Rylar and Queen Cinna, were becoming more insistent with each passing day. The royal court was demanding a decision, and the eyes of the galaxy were on her. Every time a new suitor arrived, the tension in the palace grew, and Zarin felt like she was suffocating. The weight of her duty to her people was pulling her in one direction, while her growing feelings for Marcus were pulling her in another. It had been days since she had last spoken to her parents about the matter. But tonight, Zarin knew she could not avoid them any longer. The court was assembling for another meeting, this time to finalize the decision on her marriage. Zarin had tried to avoid it, but it was clear that she could no longer remain silent. As she walked through the grand hall of the palace, she found herself thinking about Marcus. He had been a constant presence in her mind, offering her a glimpse of the life she had always wanted, but never believed she could have. His words had sparked something inside her, a belief that maybe, just maybe, she had the power to make her own choices. For the first time, Zarin allowed herself to dream of a future where she wasn't just a political pawn, but a person who could choose her own path. As she entered the meeting room, her parents were already seated at the long table, their expressions stern. The court officials were gathered, their eyes fixed on her. Zarin felt the weight of their gaze, but this time, she wasn't afraid. She had made up her mind. King Rylar looked at her with a mixture of concern and frustration. "Zarin, this has gone on long enough," he said, his voice deep and commanding. "The future of Illyria depends on your decision. You cannot keep us waiting forever." Zarin took a deep breath. She had been rehearsing this moment in her mind for days, and now it was time to speak her truth. "I cannot marry for power, father," Zarin said, her voice steady but firm. "I cannot choose a suitor simply because it will benefit the kingdom. I must choose someone who sees me for who I truly am, not for what I represent." Her word hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. Her parents exchanged a glance, and the tension in the room grew thick. Zarin's heart pounded in her chest, but she refused to back down. "You are the future of Illyria, Zarin," Queen Cinna said softly. "Your marriage will secure alliances and ensure the strength of our kingdom. This is not a decision you can make lightly." Zarin looked at her mother, her eyes filled with determination. "I understand that, but I cannot live a life that is not my own. I want a future where I can make my own choices, where I can love someone for who they are, not for their title or their power." Her parents remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Zarin could feel the weight of their disappointment, but she knew that she was doing the right thing. She could no longer live a life dictated by tradition and duty alone. Her happiness mattered too. "Father, mother," Zarin continued, her voice gaining strength, "I have made my decision. I will not marry any of the suitors who have come to court. I will not marry for political gain. I want to choose my own partner, and I have already made that choice." The room was filled with murmurs. The courtiers and advisors exchanged nervous glances, unsure of how to react. Zarin's parents sat in stunned silence, processing her words. The tension was unbearable, but Zarin stood her ground. She had made her choice, and she would not be swayed. King Rylar's voice broke the silence. "Zarin, this is a serious matter. The stability of Illyria is at stake. If you refuse to make this decision, the consequences will be dire." Zarin's heart raced, but she didn't flinch. She had known this moment would come, and she was prepared to face whatever consequences followed. "I am not refusing to make a decision," she said. "I am simply choosing to make my own. I choose love, not duty. I choose happiness, not power." Her father's face softened, and for the first time in years, Zarin saw a hint of understanding in his eyes. "You have always been a strong and independent woman, Zarin," he said, his voice quieter now. "But you must understand that your choices affect more than just yourself. They affect your people, your kingdom." "I understand," Zarin said, her voice steady. "But I cannot marry someone I do not love, no matter how good their intentions are for the kingdom." There was a long pause, and Zarin could see the struggle in her parents' eyes. They wanted what was best for her, but they were also bound by their responsibilities. It was a moment of reckoning, a moment where Zarin would either remain in the confines of tradition or break free and follow her heart. Finally, Queen Cinna spoke, her voice soft but firm. "We have always known that you would one day have to make a choice, Zarin. And while it is difficult for us to accept, we cannot stop you from following your heart. But remember, there are consequences to every decision." Zarin nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I know, Mother, but I must live my life for myself, not for others." Her parents exchanged another look, and then, slowly, King Raylar spoke. "Very well. If this is truly your decision, we will support you. But remember, you carry the future of Illyria with you. We will stand by you, no matter the path you choose." Zarin's heart swelled with relief, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. Her parents' approval, though reluctant, meant everything to her. She had chosen her own path, and now she would have to live with the consequences. As the meeting came to a close, Zarin stood tall. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in her life, she was making the choice that was truly hers. And as she left the room, she couldn't help but think of Marcus, the one person who had always seen her for who she was, not for the crown she wore. The days after Zarin's bold decision were filled with tension and uncertainty. She had chosen to follow her heart, to refuse the suitors and marry for love. But that decision did not come without consequences. The royal palace, once a place of comfort and familiarity, now felt like a battlefield. The weight of her choice pressed heavily on her shoulders, and Zarin found herself facing more challenges than she had ever anticipated. The court was in an uproar. News of Zarin's decision spread like wildfire throughout the palace, and the whispers grew louder with each passing day. Her refusal to marry for political gain had shocked the Illyrian nobles, and many were unsure how to react. The suitors, who had traveled from far-off worlds with hopes of winning her hand, were furious. Some had even threatened to withdraw their support for the kingdom, and others spoke of betrayal. Illyria's alliances were now uncertain, and the future of the kingdom seemed to hang in the balance. Zarin's parents, though they had reluctantly agreed to support her choice, were clearly worried. King Raylar had become distant, spending long hours in his study, and Queen Cinna had grown increasingly quiet. Both were deeply concerned about the impact Zarin's decision would have on the future of their people. They knew that love could not solve every problem, and they feared the consequences of their daughter's choice. Still, they had promised to stand by her, but that did little to ease the tension in the air. Despite the growing unrest around her, Zarin remained determined. She had chosen love over duty, and she would not back down. But even she could not ignore the challenges ahead. As much as she wanted to be with Marcus, the political pressure was immense. The Illyrian court, with all its power and influence, was not going to accept her decision easily. And yet Zarin could not help but feel a sense of peace when she thought of Marcus. He had always treated her as an equal, never once asking her to compromise who she was. He had made her believe that love, true love, could overcome even the deepest of political divides. One evening, as the stars twinkled above the palace gardens, Zarin found herself alone on a balcony, gazing out at the vast expanse of space. The quiet of the night was soothing, and for a moment, she allowed herself to relax. But her thoughts soon turned back to the challenges she faced. She knew that she would have to convince her people, her family, and the court that her decision was the right one. It would not be easy, but Zarin was prepared to fight for what she believed in. Just as she was lost in her thoughts, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Zarin turned to see Marcus approaching, his familiar smile lighting up his face. It was a rare moment when they could be alone, away from the watchful eyes of the court. Marcus had been staying in the palace for the past few weeks, continuing his diplomatic work, but he always found time to visit Zarin when he could. "You look troubled, princess," he said gently, his voice soft but concerned. "What's on your mind?" Zarin took a deep breath and sighed. "The court is in chaos. My parents are worried. The suitors are angry. I've made my choice, but I feel like the entire galaxy is against me." Marcus stepped closer, his eyes filled with understanding. "I know it's not easy. The pressure is overwhelming, and there's no way to avoid the consequences of your decision. But you're doing what's best for you, Zarin. That's more important than anything else." Zarin met his gaze, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know if I can handle all of this. I'm the future Queen of Illyria. I have a duty to my people, but I also have my own dreams. I want to live a life where I can be free, where I can choose who I love, not just who is chosen for me." Marcus took a step forward, his hand gently resting on hers. "You are strong, Zarin, and you don't have to face this alone. I'll be by your side, no matter what happens." Zarin looked down at their hands, feeling the surge of warmth. She had never felt so understood. In Marcus, she had found not just a partner, but a true ally. He wasn't asking her to change, to give up her duty, or to sacrifice her future. He was simply offering her support, and that was something she didn't realize she needed until now. "But what if my decision tears Illyria apart?" Zarin asked, her voice tinged with worry. "What if I'm making the wrong choice? What if I'm failing my people?" Marcus gently lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his eyes. "You can't live your life for others, Zarin. You are the ruler of Illyria, yes, but you are also a person with your own desires, your own heart. You are allowed to choose your own path." Zarin felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "I'm so afraid, Marcus. I've never had to make a decision like this before. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I can't keep living for other people's expectations. I have to be true to myself." Marcus smiled softly. "And that's why I believe in you. You are brave, Zarin. No matter what happens, you will find a way to make it work. You're not just the future Queen of Illyria. You're someone who will change the galaxy for the better." His words filled Zarin with a new sense of hope. She had spent so long trying to meet the expectations of everyone around her that she had almost forgotten what it meant to live for herself. But with Marcus by her side, she felt like she could face whatever came next. For the first time in weeks, Zarin felt a sense of clarity. The road ahead would not be easy, and she knew that there would be challenges to overcome. But as long as she stayed true to herself, she knew that she could face anything. And with Marcus by her side, she wasn't alone. The days following Zarin's bold decision were both challenging and transformative. The Illyrian court had never experienced such upheaval. Many of the noble families had voiced their displeasure at Zarin's refusal to marry for political gain, and the suitors who had once vied for her hand now turned their backs in anger. The tension was palpable in the palace, and Zarin knew that her choices had set a course that could change the future of Illyria. But even in the face of these challenges, Zarin felt a sense of peace she had never known before. She had made a choice for herself, and though it was not easy, she believed it was the right one. She had chosen love over duty, her heart over her crown. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew that whatever came, she would face it with courage and determination. One morning, as Zarin sat in the palace gardens, she looked up at the sky and reflected on how far she had come. The once overwhelming pressure to marry the right suitor, to make alliances for the kingdom's sake, had all but faded. Instead, she focused on the future she had now chosen, a future where she could live for herself, not for the expectations of others. Marcus had been with her every step of the way. He had supported her through the long nights of doubt, the harsh words from the court, and the uncertain moments when she wondered if she had made the right decision. His presence was a steady anchor, a reminder that no matter how difficult the path, she was not alone. Zarin smiled to herself as she thought about him. Marcus was not just a diplomat, a human from a distant world. He was someone who saw her for who she truly was. He never treated her like a princess, never demanded anything from her. Instead, he offered understanding, kindness, and respect. In him, Zarin had found more than a partner. She had found someone who made her feel free. But the road ahead was still uncertain. While her parents had reluctantly accepted her decision, they had made it clear that she would have to work hard to rebuild the trust of the Illyrian people. The nobles and the court were still not convinced. Some were ready to push for an alliance with one of the alien suitors who had been rejected, hoping to salvage the kingdom's standing in the galaxy. But Zarin was determined to prove that love could be as powerful as politics. It was on one of those difficult days that Zarin's resolve was tested. The council had called a meeting, and it was clear that the nobles were not ready to accept her decision. They demanded answers, questioned her ability to lead, and expressed their doubts about her future reign. The meeting was tense, and, for a moment, Zarin felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. She knew that she was not just fighting for her love, but for the future of her kingdom. As the nobles debated, Zarin stood at the front of the room, her posture straight and her voice steady. "I understand your concerns," she said, addressing the council with a calm but firm tone. "I know that my decision to follow my heart has been unconventional, but I believe it is the right one for Illyria. We are a kingdom of strength, wisdom, and progress. And if we are to leave the galaxy, we must begin by leading with our hearts, not just with power." The room fell silent as the council members exchanged uncertain glances. Zarin's words had struck a chord with some of them, but it was clear that there was still resistance. One of the older nobles, Lord Theron, a respected figure in the court, stood up and spoke. "Princess, you speak of leading with your heart," he said, his voice thick with skepticism. "But love does not protect a kingdom. Alliances, strength, and loyalty do. How can we trust that your decisions will not leave Illyria vulnerable?" Zarin's eyes met Lord Theron's, and she could see the doubt in his gaze. But she also saw something else, an opening. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts before speaking again. "Lord Theron, I understand that the strength of Illyria lies in our unity, in our alliances with other powerful nations. But the true strength of a kingdom comes not just from its military or its wealth. It comes from the people. Illyria is strong because we have always adapted, because we have always valued what is just and right. Love, kindness, and respect are what make us truly powerful. And that is why I stand before you today, not to ask for your forgiveness, but to ask for your support in building a new era for Illyria." There was a pause. Zarin could feel the eyes of every council member on her. The silence seemed to stretch on forever. Then, one by one, the nobles began to speak. Some expressed their concerns, but many nodded in agreement. It was clear that Zarin's words had planted a seed, and though the road to acceptance would be long, the foundation for change had been laid. As the meeting came to a close, Zarin's parents, who had been silent throughout the discussion, stood up. King Rylar, though still uneasy, addressed the council. "We have heard the princess's words," he said, his voice firm but understanding. "And while we may not all agree, we recognize that Illyria must evolve. We will support our daughter in this new era, as difficult as it may be. Together, we will work to ensure that Illyria remains strong, both politically and in spirit." Zarin felt a sense of relief wash over her. Her parents, though still hesitant, had given their blessing. The council had not fully embraced her decision, but they had agreed to give her a chance. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was a step in the right direction. As she left the meeting room, Zarin felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. The future of Illyria was still uncertain, but she now knew that she had the power to shape it. And with Marcus by her side, she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The road to a new era would not be easy, but Zarin was no longer afraid. She had chosen love over duty, and she had the courage to build a future where both could exist. And for the first time, Zarin felt truly free.